It began in the winter of 1941, the coldest the North Atlantic had seen in years. Allied convoys stretched from Halifax to Liverpool, threading through black water stalked by unseen predators. Each ship was a fragile lifeline to embattled Britain. Yet, amid the known dangers of German U-boats, another mystery lurked. Allied ships vanishing without a trace, far from any recorded enemy patrol. The British Admiralty kept detailed charts of U-boat wolf packs, but by December 1941, several merchant and support vessels had disappeared in regions considered safe. Among them was the USS Nereus, a cargo ship en route from St. Thomas to Newfoundland, carrying 10,000 tons of bauxite, vital material for aircraft production. She sent no distress signal. No debris was found. The case was quietly classified as presumed lost due to enemy action, though intelligence could find no record of any U-boat in her vicinity. Naval officers began to whisper, how could a 400-foot ship simply cease to exist? The mystery deepened as other ships met similar fates. The HMS Dasher, one of Britain's smallest escort carriers, was undergoing training exercises in the Firth of Clyde in March 1943. The crew of 528 men had just finished flight, operations with Fairey Swordfish aircraft, when an enormous explosion ripped through the lower decks. Witnesses on the shore described a flash of orange fire and black smoke rising hundreds of feet into the sky. Within 6 minutes, the Dasher had capsized and sank beneath the cold Scottish waters. More than 350 men perished. No enemy aircraft or submarines were detected. And the weather was clear, calm, almost eerily still. Official investigations moved quickly. The Royal Navy Board of Inquiry concluded that petrol vapors in the ship's fuel system had ignited, but internal memos later revealed discrepancies in testimony. Multiple survivors reported a series of smaller detonations moments before the main blast. Consistent, they claimed, with planted charges or munitions mishandling. One survivor, able seaman Arthur Layton, recalled in his post-war interview, "It wasn't one explosion, it was 3, maybe 4, then the big one. It felt wrong from the start." As rumours spread, the British government imposed a total blackout on the story. Families were instructed not to discuss the incident, and the media was ordered to report that the carrier had been lost in an accident during wartime operations. The wreck of HMS Dasher lay undisturbed for decades, sealed under layers of official secrecy. It would not be until the 1980s that divers rediscovered her remains, confirming that parts of the ship's aviation fuel system had been modified without standard safety procedures, likely in haste to meet wartime demand. Yet some still argue those modifications were convenient scapegoats for something else. Perhaps an experimental test gone wrong. The United States Navy took notice. The loss bore unsettling similarities to its own unexplained disappearances along the East Coast and in the Caribbean. Internal naval correspondence, recently declassified, shows senior officers drawing parallels between the British incident and missing US cargo ships, including the USS Cyclops, which vanished in 1918 under eerily similar conditions. Even decades later, the Cyclops' fate remained unsolved, having disappeared between Barbados and Baltimore with 309 men aboard. The connection between these wartime losses was circumstantial, but undeniable. Historian Commander Robert Jenkins later summarized the feeling in post-war analysis. "We expected losses to the enemy. What we did not expect were ships that simply never came home in calm seas, under clear skies, and with no trace left behind." His words captured the unease that crept through Allied command. Was it human error, experimental technology, or something more insidious? Perhaps sabotage from within. By late 1943, both the Admiralty and the US Navy began maintaining new, anomalous loss records. Cases where the cause of a sinking was unclear, and no enemy could be confirmed responsible. The lists grew. Each report was meticulously stamped. No confirmed enemy contact. Each name represented hundreds of lives lost without explanation. For sailors in the convoys, these stories became grim whispers told over black coffee during night watches. They spoke of ships that vanished from convoy columns, of distress flares that never came, and of ghostly radar echoes that disappeared before identification. The ocean, they said, was swallowing men whole, and the Navy, for reasons unknown, wasn't telling everything it knew. As 1943 turned into 1944, the pattern of mysterious sinkings began to haunt both sides of the Atlantic. British, Canadian, and American naval intelligence shared coded telegrams, quietly comparing details. But with war still raging, the truth, whatever it was, had to wait. The loss of HMS Dasher would remain one of the most secretive naval disasters of the war. Official records still list fuel explosion as the cause. Yet for many who served at sea, that answer never satisfied. The unexplained, it seemed, had a way of repeating itself. And soon, in the waters off the Bahamas, another destroyer would add its name to the growing list of ships the Navy couldn't explain. September 1944. The Caribbean sun burned hot above the restless Atlantic, but for the crew of the USS Warrington, DD-383, it was anything but tranquil. She was a seasoned destroyer, sleek, powerful, and battle-tested, assigned to protect the vulnerable supply lanes that linked the Panama Canal to the US East Coast. By then, the war had turned in favor of the Allies, but nature, and perhaps something darker, would soon remind them that victory was never guaranteed. On the morning of September 12th, Warrington departed Norfolk, Virginia, escorting the escort carrier Croatan to Trinidad. It was routine work for the veteran crew. Among the sailors was Chief Petty Officer James Harland, who had served since 1939. He wrote in his journal, "The sea feels calm today. We've heard rumors of a storm south of Bermuda, but that's a world away. Feels like a false alarm." Within 48 hours, that false alarm had become a killer, the Great Atlantic Hurricane of 1944. As the storm intensified, communication lines began to fail. Radio operators described static unlike anything they had experienced before. A low hum, like machinery grinding underwater. The Croatan broke contact first, turning east to escape the growing gale. Warrington pressed on, attempting to hold position, but the winds soon reached over 100 knots. By September 13th, the ship was fighting for survival in seas towering over 70 feet high. Lieutenant Commander Herbert R. Browning, the ship's captain, ordered ballast adjustments to stabilize her roll, but the destroyer's light frame, built for speed rather than endurance, struggled to resist the monstrous waves. Crewmen later reported a shuddering vibration running through the hull, as if something deep inside was tearing loose. Then at 11:30 a.m., the power failed. Darkness fell across the compartments. Warrington was adrift in the heart of chaos. The storm raged for another 24 hours. By nightfall, radio logs indicate the ship had sent 2 fragmented SOS transmissions. The last reading simply, "Taking water fast. Engines out. Position unknown." Search and rescue began immediately after the hurricane subsided. The destroyers, John D. Henley and Bainbridge, reached the area 3 days later. What they found was baffling. Floating life jackets, a few oil drums, and scattered debris spread over a massive radius, but no major wreckage of Warringtons. 321 men, only 73 were ever recovered. At first glance, it seemed a tragic but straightforward case. A warship lost to one of the most violent storms in naval history. Yet, as investigators began reviewing the details, cracks appeared in the official story. Warrington's distress signals had come from an area well outside the storm's recorded path, and the pattern of debris didn't align with hurricane dynamics. It was too widely scattered, suggesting an internal explosion or hull breach before she sank. Declassified naval memos reveal that certain sections of the ship's engineering logs were missing when the report was compiled. Specifically, the last recorded entries from the radar and sonar rooms. A note from the Bureau of Ships, dated October 1944, read, "Cause of loss indeterminate. Possible structural failure. Recommend further examination." No further examination ever occurred. Some officers quietly speculated that Warrington had suffered a catastrophic engineering malfunction, perhaps a boiler explosion. Others whispered about sabotage. At the height of the war, the US Navy was experimenting with new radar systems using high-voltage magnetrons. Improper shielding or water intrusion could cause severe electrical discharge, possibly enough to ignite fuel vapors. But official statements avoided such speculation, focusing instead on the uncontrollable force of nature. Survivors provided a haunting picture. Seaman Charles Red Hensley recalled, "It wasn't just the storm. Something went wrong below deck. There was a flash, not lightning, and the ship just broke. His words were never included in the official report. For decades, his testimony remained buried in forgotten naval archives, only resurfacing when historians began re-examining unexplained losses during the 1990s. In later years, wreck hunting expeditions attempted to locate the remains of Warrington using sonar mapping and submersibles. None succeeded. Some argued the wreck was carried off by shifting currents. Others noted that the ship's last recorded coordinates, those transmitted before the final SOS, placed her over a deep trench known to generate powerful magnetic interference. Theories began to emerge, some suggesting the destroyer might have been drawn into a violent downdraft or pressure anomaly, a rare meteorological phenomenon that could tear a vessel apart. But even those explanations failed to fully account for the missing radar logs. The loss of the USS Warrington became a cautionary tale within the Navy, a grim reminder that not all wartime dangers came from the enemy. Internal bulletins quietly circulated to commanding officers, urging increased vigilance regarding unexplained electrical malfunctions and communication blackouts. What truly happened to the Warrington remains one of the most perplexing naval mysteries of World War II. She was a destroyer built to outrun submarines, to weather torpedoes and gunfire, yet nature, or perhaps something within her own hull, destroyed her without warning. The Atlantic claimed her secrets, as it had claimed so many others before. And while American investigators filed her under storm loss in the Pacific, another strange disappearance, this time involving an entire carrier group, was about to deepen the riddle of the Navy's most mysterious wartime sinkings. It was February 1942. The Pacific War had turned desperate for the Allies. Japanese forces swept across the Philippines, Singapore had fallen, and the Dutch East Indies were under siege. Every ship, every aircraft counted, and in that crucial moment, the US Navy made a risky decision to send its oldest aircraft carrier, the USS Langley, CV-1, on a mission few expected her to survive. The Langley was no ordinary ship. Once a coal transport, she was converted in 1920 into America's first aircraft carrier, a pioneer of naval aviation. But by 1942, she was outdated, too slow to keep up with modern fleet operations. Stripped of most of her aircraft, she was reassigned to ferry P-40 Warhawks to reinforce the Allies' crumbling defense in Java. Her mission was simple on paper: deliver 32 Army Air Force fighters to the Dutch port of Cilacap. In reality, it was a gamble, a desperate attempt to slow Japan's unstoppable advance. On February 22nd, Langley departed Fremantle, Australia, under escort by two destroyers, the USS Whipple and the USS Edsall. The convoy moved cautiously through the Java Sea, a region now crawling with Japanese patrol planes. Radio intercepts warned of enemy activity, but the Langley pressed on. Captain Robert P. McConnell, a veteran of early naval aviation, wrote in his final message home, "We are the old ships sent to carry the young birds. May we get them there before the storm closes in." The storm came on February 27th in the form of 9 Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers from the 21st Air Flotilla. The attack began at 11:40 a.m., swift, precise, and devastating. Despite evasive maneuvers, the Langley's wide deck made her an easy target. 5 bombs struck in quick succession, setting the flight deck ablaze and destroying much of the cargo. Within minutes, she was listing heavily to port. Captain McConnell gave the order to abandon ship. The destroyers closed in to rescue survivors and deliver the coup de grace: 2 torpedoes to scuttle America's first carrier beneath the waves. Officially, that was the end of the story. But as the Whipple and Edsall departed the scene, an unsettling silence followed. Both ships were ordered to transport survivors to Australia, yet within 48 hours, all communication from the Edsall ceased. Japanese forces later claimed to have sunk her during an engagement off Christmas Island, but records conflicted. Reconnaissance photos showed no confirmed wreckage, and post-war research revealed that the Edsall's last transmission came hours after the supposed attack from a location nearly 200 miles away. Naval historian Samuel Elliott Morrison later noted the inconsistency in his Pacific War volumes. The movements of the USS Edsall after the loss of the Langley remain uncertain. No definitive account has been produced. To this day, her exact fate, and the disappearance of more than 150 sailors aboard, remains one of the lesser-known mysteries of the war. Survivors from the Langley who made it to Australia told of strange interference on their radios during the final hours. Lieutenant Harold Olson, communications officer, recorded in his log, "Receiving cross-signal interference, not Japanese frequencies, unknown origin, consistent 10-second intervals." His entry was later redacted from official reports. Some researchers believe it may have been a malfunction caused by atmospheric conditions. Others suggest an experimental Allied transmission was being tested nearby, but the Navy's silence on the matter has fueled decades of speculation. The loss of the Langley symbolized more than just the end of a ship. It was the disappearance of an era. She represented the birth of American carrier aviation, and her sinking was a stark reminder of how far the war had turned against the Allies. Yet for naval intelligence, the lingering questions about her escort's disappearance presented a new layer of intrigue. Had they been ambushed, or had they fallen victim to mechanical failure, perhaps even sabotage? In 2017, a research team from the US Navy and the Indonesian government located the wreck of the Langley at a depth of 430 feet, resting on her side near the southern coast of Java. But the Edsol's wreck was found in an unexpected place, 400 miles from her reported position, in deep water far off her last known course. How she traveled that distance before sinking remains unexplained. The hull bore no torpedo impact marks, and her bridge was missing entirely, as if torn away by an internal explosion. Naval records show no indication of an internal blast, yet divers reported fragments of electrical wiring fused into the steel bulkheads as though subjected to extreme heat, far beyond what conventional fires could produce. Whatever caused it, it silenced the Edsall before any mayday could be sent. The Langley's loss was officially attributed to Japanese air attack, the Edsall's to enemy action, but behind closed doors, naval analysts began compiling a classified report labeled simply Unaccounted Pacific Losses, February-March 1942. Several officers noted similarities to Atlantic incidents: sudden disappearances, missing logs, erratic communications, and unexplained internal damage. As the war expanded across the Pacific, such cases would multiply. Ship after ship lost with no survivors, no wreckage, and no answers. For those who had survived the Langley's final voyage, the feeling was inescapable. Something was happening beneath the surface of the war, something even the Navy couldn't explain. The story of the Langley and the Edsall would fade into obscurity as new battles captured the world's attention. But in 1945, another ship, a merchant freighter pressed into wartime service, would reignite the questions no one dared ask. How could a vessel lost for 5 years suddenly return to the radar as if it had never left? In the final year of the war, 1945, the Atlantic was once again restless. Germany was collapsing, the U-boats retreating, and Allied control of the seas seemed absolute. Yet in this time of triumph, a ghost returned, a ship thought long lost. Her name was the SS Cotopaxi, a merchant freighter pressed into military service at the war's outset. She had vanished without a trace in December 1940, while en route from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba. For 5 years, her fate remained a mystery, until she inexplicably reappeared. The Cotopaxi's story began as one of many wartime requisitions. Built in 1918 by the Shipping Board, she was an aging steamship, 253 feet long, often used for cargo runs through the Caribbean. When she sailed on December 1st, 1940, under Captain WWII, her hold was loaded with coal, essential fuel for Allied naval operations in the region. She was last heard from 2 days later, transmitting a routine weather report. Then silence. No SOS, no debris, no survivors. In the months that followed, dozens of search aircraft scoured her route. Nothing was found. The US Navy quietly marked her as missing, presumed sunk, though no German U-boats had been recorded operating in the area at that time. By 1945, most had forgotten her name, but on July 7th of that year, near the end of the war, a Cuban coast station reported a radar contact moving slowly north of Havana. The contact bore the signature of an old freighter, registration number 2463, the Cotopaxi's exact number. The report reached US naval intelligence in Miami within hours. The destroyer escort, USS Reynolds, was dispatched to intercept. As it approached, the radar image began to fade. When Reynolds reached the coordinates, there was nothing. No ship, no smoke, No trace on sonar. The ocean was calm and empty. The sighting was dismissed as radar error, possibly atmospheric interference caused by tropical storms. Still, the incident was logged as unexplained contact. Years later, declassified records revealed that this was not an isolated incident. Between 1943 and 1945, at least 6 Allied ships reported radar returns matching the Cotopaxi's tonnage and transponder code. In each case, the signal appeared briefly, vanished, then reappeared miles away, as if the ship were drifting in and out of existence. Most of these reports came from US Navy patrol squadrons flying PBM Mariners and PBY Catalinas, aircraft equipped with some of the earliest experimental radar systems. A technical anomaly was the logical explanation, but the frequency and accuracy of the sightings kept the mystery alive. Lieutenant Commander Harold F. Bennett of the Naval Research Laboratory wrote in a 1947 report, "It is improbable that so many radar returns of identical signature could be coincidental. Either a vessel of similar profile was operating covertly, or residual mechanical signals are being reflected off the oceanic atmosphere." His report was quietly shelved. Meanwhile, the family of Captain Meyer continued to press for answers. Decades after the war, divers and wreck hunters searched for any trace of the Cotopaxi. In 1985, a small wreck was discovered 35 miles off St. Augustine, Florida. Initial speculation suggested it was the missing freighter, but the US Navy declined to confirm, citing insufficient identifiers. When maritime archaeologists finally gained access to the site in 2019, they found conclusive evidence: the ship's bell, stamped with SS Cotopaxi, 1918. It was her. But the mystery didn't end there. The wreck showed signs of structural damage inconsistent with storm or grounding. Hull plates were bent outward, suggesting an internal explosion, though the cargo manifest listed only coal. Moreover, the ship's compass housing was found fused to the deck, melted into the metal as though subjected to intense magnetic heat. The cause remains undetermined. Naval historian Dr. Elizabeth Warren noted, "It's as if something interfered with the ship's navigation systems or internal wiring. There are cases of such magnetic anomalies recorded in the region, rare, but not impossible." The region she referred to lay within what sailors called the Triangle, a stretch of sea that by the 1940s had already gained a reputation for strange disappearances. The Navy never acknowledged those stories publicly, but within its confidential communications, the area was designated a zone of recurring navigational interference for wartime command. However, the Cotopaxi's mystery represented a deeper problem, one that went beyond a single ship. Across both oceans, radar anomalies, sudden disappearances, and internal explosions were being quietly compiled into restricted files marked Unexplained Maritime Losses. The list now included everything from destroyers to cargo ships, from the frigid North Atlantic to the steaming Pacific. Each case carried a familiar pattern: calm weather, missing logs, and no enemy in sight. As the war drew to a close, the Navy faced an uncomfortable truth: that not every loss could be blamed on the enemy. A 1946 internal review concluded that a small but consistent number of losses remain unaccounted for by conventional means. Among those files was the name Cotopaxi, stamped in faded black ink with a handwritten note scrawled in the margin: "Signal received. Cannot explain." Her reappearance, or the illusion of it, would haunt naval historians for decades. The story of the Cotopaxi marked the final wartime echo of a pattern that began years earlier with the HMS Dasher, continued with the USS Warrington, and shadowed every fleet across the Atlantic and Pacific. By the end of 1945, even as peace returned, questions remained. What truly happened to these ships the Navy couldn't explain? In the aftermath of victory, intelligence officers from the US and Britain began compiling their most secret files, not of enemy operations, but of their own vanished vessels. The war was over, but the mystery was not. Somewhere, beneath miles of ocean, the answers waited, sealed within the wreckage of ships the world was never meant to find. The guns of war had finally fallen silent. It was late 1945. Victory in Europe was complete. Japan had surrendered, and millions of soldiers were returning home. But inside the Naval Intelligence Archives in Washington and London, Another battle was quietly beginning. One fought not with weapons, but with unanswered questions. Among the countless pages of post-war reports lay a growing dossier labeled Unexplained Maritime Losses, 1939-1945. Its contents told of ships that had vanished in calm seas, of radio transmissions that stopped mid-sentence, and of patterns too precise to ignore. And at the top of that list sat the most haunting name of all, USS Cyclops. Though technically predating World War II, the Cyclops had become a recurring point of reference during the war's mysterious ship losses. She was a massive collier, a fuel ship built in 1910, last seen in March 1918, while sailing from Barbados to Baltimore with over 10,000 tons of manganese ore. No SOS, no debris, no oil slick. Over 300 men gone. Her disappearance was never solved. Now, nearly 3 decades later, naval investigators began noticing echoes of the Cyclops in wartime losses, such as the Warrington and the Cotopaxi. Captain Leonard V. Harding of U.S. Naval Intelligence wrote in 1946, "Each of these cases involves abrupt loss of communication, malfunctioning instruments, and absence of enemy contact. The statistical improbability of these coincidences warrants further investigation." He wasn't alone. In Britain, Commander Harold Jameson of the Admiralty Research Division was compiling a parallel list, one that included the HMS Dasher, the HMS Affray, and several smaller vessels lost under mysterious circumstances in home waters. The post-war cooperation between the two nations' intelligence communities led to a top-secret joint inquiry known as Operation Tidefall. Operation Tidefall's objective was simple but daunting: determine whether the disappearances shared a common cause, enemy technology, navigational failure, or something entirely new. Over several months, analysts cross-referenced weather data, convoy routes, and classified intercepts from both the Kriegsmarine and the Imperial Japanese Navy. What they discovered defied simple categorization. Many of the missing vessels had last reported compass deviations, electrical failures, or interference in communications moments before their final transmissions. Some had even logged vibrations or humming noises from unknown origins. In one of the more chilling reports, dated May 1945, a US Navy submarine, USS Ventura, described detecting anomalous sonar echoes while patrolling near the Norwegian coast. The readings appeared to show metallic objects moving at extreme depths, far beyond what any known submarine of the era could reach. 2 days later, the signal vanished. The Navy officially attributed it to a technical malfunction, but the file was included in the Tidefall dossier under the category Unexplained Subsurface Activity. Not all within the intelligence community agreed on the direction of the inquiry. Some believed these cases were the product of wartime chaos, equipment failures, poor maintenance, and the unpredictable fury of nature. Others suspected deliberate concealment of experimental technology. One British memorandum, authored by physicist Sir Robert Watson Watt, inventor of radar, hinted at secret tests of long-range magnetic field devices and early sonar prototypes. If unshielded or misused, and he wrote, such experiments could interfere catastrophically with electrical systems aboard steel-hulled vessels. The implication was alarming. Some of the Navy's own technological advances may have doomed their ships. For the families of the lost sailors, these revelations would never come. The files remained sealed, and the official explanations, storms, mines, mechanical failure, stood unchallenged. Yet among the naval officers who had survived the war, there was a growing sense of unease. Lieutenant Robert Fisher, a communications specialist who served in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters, wrote in his 1947 memoir, "There were times when the sea itself seemed to turn against us. We would lose contact, lose bearings, lose ships, all without a single enemy in sight. The Navy had names for these things, but no answers." In the following years, the pattern persisted. Peacetime vessels occasionally vanished under similarly strange circumstances. Training submarines, patrol boats, even cargo ships navigating familiar routes. Each time, official explanations grew thinner and the Tidefall files thicker. The Royal Navy's HMS Affray, lost in 1951 during a training exercise in the English Channel, would later be added to the list. Her last message read simply, "We are running in at 90 feet. Then silence. By the time Operation Tidefall was quietly shut down in 1953, it had compiled over 120 documented cases of unaccounted naval losses and anomalies dating back to 1918. Its final assessment concluded that while environmental and technical causes remain the most probable explanations, a residual number of cases remain inconsistent with known wartime phenomena. That line, cryptic and understated, was the only surviving clue to a decades-long effort to uncover what the sea was hiding. For historians, these events remain open wounds, reminders that even in the most technologically advanced militaries of the 20th century, the ocean could still command fear. For sailors, they became myths passed down through generations. They spoke of ships that vanished between radio checks, of compasses that spun without reason, of radar that showed echoes moving against the current. The war had ended, but its mysteries had not. And in the cold archives of naval intelligence, locked behind steel doors, the final chapter was yet to be written. A chapter where patterns of loss pointed towards something systematic, something still unexplained. As investigators turned to the classified post-war files of both the British Admiralty and the US Navy, a chilling realization began to surface. The unexplained didn't stop with the war's end. It was only beginning. By 1946, the war that had engulfed the world was over. But in the offices of Naval Command in Washington, London, and Pearl Harbor, another war had begun. A war with the unexplained. Boxes of sealed files marked "unaccounted losses" lined the corridors of intelligence bureaus. Ships that had vanished under calm skies, vessels that disintegrated without contact, radio transmissions that ended mid-word, all recorded, all unresolved. For the men tasked with finding answers, it was a haunting realization. Even in victory, they had not conquered the sea. Rear Admiral Ernest F. Small, one of the US Navy's post-war intelligence directors, put it bluntly in a confidential memo. "We have faced the enemy, and we have faced the elements. What remains defies both." That memo summarized the atmosphere of unease that gripped the upper echelons of naval command. As ships returned home and the fleet demobilized, patterns began to emerge that no one could easily dismiss. The mysterious sinkings of the Dasher, Warrington, Langley, and Cotopaxi weren't isolated tragedies. They were pieces of a much larger puzzle. In late 1946, the Admiralty and US Navy established a covert joint task force known as Project Grey Wave. Its mission was to review every recorded loss since 1939 that lacked a definitive cause. Scientists, engineers, and seasoned commanders pored over wreck reports, metallurgical samples, and surviving radio logs. What they uncovered was disturbing. Many of the ships that had vanished or exploded exhibited similar technical irregularities: spontaneous electrical surges, erratic compasses, and sudden total communication failures. One internal summary noted, in nearly all cases, final transmissions contained fragmented words, suggesting instantaneous disruption of power. From these findings, a new theory emerged, one that would never appear in official history books. It proposed that a combination of early radar experimentation, magnetic field disturbances from new naval technology, and environmental conditions in certain oceanic regions could create interference strong enough to disable ships without warning. In other words, human innovation had become its own enemy. The sea was reacting to the modern age. In a private meeting at the Pentagon, Rear Admiral William R. Purnell reportedly remarked, "We built machines to conquer the ocean. Perhaps the ocean simply answered." It was a poetic, almost fatalistic statement, but it echoed the quiet dread of a generation of officers who had seen ships vanish beyond human understanding. The British took the findings even further. Commander Jameson, one of the Tidefall analysts, concluded that the frequency of these unexplained losses peaked in areas of high geomagnetic variation, regions known today for causing compass interference and radar distortion. He wrote in his closing report, "These zones of magnetic flux may have contributed to multiple unexplained navigational failures. The phenomenon is real, though our understanding of it is incomplete." The report was stamped, classified, and buried in Admiralty archives, where it would remain for decades. Still, the men who had survived such events carried the memories with them. Petty Officer Harold Layton, survivor of HMS Dasher, was interviewed in 1958 for a BBC wartime retrospective. He recalled, "We thought the war would end the fear, but it didn't. There are things at sea that don't make sense. The Navy knows that, even if they won't say it." His eyes, the interviewer later noted, never left the horizon. By the mid-1950s, Project Grey Wave was quietly disbanded. The official narrative, storms, fuel leaks, navigational errors, replaced the classified uncertainties. The public was never told that dozens of ships were lost without trace, in conditions too calm, too controlled, to fit the explanations. The files were sealed, the survivors retired, and history moved on. But among historians and naval engineers, the whispers persisted. In 1978, during the Cold War, a team of US Navy researchers revisited the wartime archives while studying magnetic anomalies in the Atlantic. In their technical summary, they found the same patterns described in 1946, unchanged, unexplained. One note in the margin, written by a researcher decades removed from the original events, summed up the enigma perfectly. "We keep calling them disappearances, but perhaps they were simply events beyond our ability to measure." Today, the ocean still holds those secrets. The wrecks of ships like the USS Warrington and HMS Dasher lie in silence, their hulls twisted and broken, their final moments hidden from view. For every recovered vessel, there are others still missing. Their names etched in brass memorials, their fates recorded only as lost, no enemy action reported. The Second World War gave humanity its greatest technological leap: radar, sonar, nuclear power. And yet, amid that progress, it also revealed the limits of human control. The mysterious ship sinkings that the Navy couldn't explain remain a testament to that boundary. Where knowledge meets the unknown, the sea, after all, keeps its own counsel. And even after the world's deadliest war, it refused to give up all of its ghosts. As one naval archivist wrote decades later, looking over the yellowed pages of the unexplained maritime losses file, "We went to war to defeat the enemy. Instead, we discovered how little we understood about the world beneath our own ships.